So, what we're looking at for the first week of January in Australia is, well, a continent literally split in two by weather. It's an absolutely incredible picture of contrasts. You've got one half of the country bracing for a metre of rain and potentially catastrophic floods, while the other half is staring down the barrel of scorching heat and an extreme fire danger. We're going to break down this wild week of simultaneous weather extremes. And you really don't have to look far to see just how stark this divide is. Just take a look at the forecast for a single day, January 3rd. Up in Darwin, in the north, it's hot, it's sticky, they're expecting storms and up to 30 millimeters of rain. But then you go all the way down south to Adelaide, and it's a beautiful, sunny day, a pleasant 28 degrees, not a drop of rain in sight. It's like you're looking at two totally different countries that just happen to be on the same continent. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to talk a bit more about this huge weather divide. Then we'll head straight up to Queensland to get into the details of this massive deluge that's on the way. After that, we'll check out the summer storms firing up in the southeast. Then we'll swing over to the intense heat wave building across the nation. And finally, we'll connect that heat to the really serious fire danger it's creating. You know, this week really drives home that whole land of extremes thing for Australia. It's not just an expression. We're talking about a country facing completely opposite threats at the exact same time. There are active flood warnings in the north and east, while simultaneously, you've got heat wave and fire danger warnings popping up in the west and south. This really sets the stage for a week where emergency services are going to be stretched incredibly thin, dealing with completely different types of disasters. Okay, let's dive into our first major story. The unbelievable amount of rain that's taking aim at northern Queensland. And this isn't just one simple storm. Forecasters are seeing it as a two-part event. Part one is an immediate soaking just south of Townsville, but part two, that's a developing tropical low that could unleash truly historic rainfall totals a bit further up the coast. So what's causing all this rain right now? Well, it comes down to something called a convergence zone. Basically, think of it like this. You have all this moist air getting pulled in from the northeast and the north, and these winds are colliding right over the coastline. When they hit each other, all that wet tropical air has nowhere to go but up. And as it rises, it cools, and it just dumps all of its moisture as relentless, heavy rain. And listen, this isn't just a possibility. It's already happening. Some spots, like Halifax, have already seen up to 250 millimeters of rain just overnight. That's nearly 10 inches of rain in just a handful of hours. And the scary part is, this is just the prelude. This is just the opening act. This is where the concern really ramps up. For part two of this whole thing, a big tropical low is brewing out in the Coral Sea. As it inches towards the coast, it's expected to just fire hose an incredible amount of moisture onto areas like the Cassowary Coast. We're talking forecasts of over 1,000 millimeters. That's a full meter of rain over the next week. To put that into perspective, some places could end up with a 3-week rainfall total of over 2.5 meters. Just try to picture that. Now, here's where things get really interesting and, frankly, a bit counterintuitive. You've got this quote here from Josh over at Cyclones OZ. Less rainfall resulting in a much bigger flooding impact. You read that and you kind of have to stop and think, wait, what? How does less rain cause more flooding? That doesn't make any sense, right? Well, this is the dangerous reality of the situation. The ground, the river systems, they are already completely saturated from weeks and weeks of rain. Think of the land like a sponge that's already full of water. A month ago, it could soak up a ton of rain, but now that sponge is full. So even a smaller amount of new rain has absolutely nowhere to go. It just immediately runs off into the rivers, which could trigger major flooding way faster than normal. Okay, so while the north is on high alert for these historic floods, let's pivot way down south. A completely separate weather system is bringing a whole different kind of threat to the southeast: severe thunderstorms. It's a pretty classic summer setup, but it's got some extra potent ingredients that could really kick off some widespread and nasty storm activity. You can see the key hotspots laid out here. It's a huge area, stretching from inland New South Wales near places like Narrabri and Moree, all the way up through the border ranges into Queensland. It's another huge headache for emergency services to keep an eye on, pulling resources and attention while those other major threats are happening. And these storms could even drift all the way to the coast, affecting big cities like Sydney and Newcastle. And not all these storms are created equal. Forecasters are watching for two main flavors. Further inland, we're expecting pulse thunderstorms. These are going to be widespread, and they could pack a real punch with a ton of intense lightning.
Then, as you get closer to the coast, where the air is much more humid, what we call high dew points, you get high precipitation storms. And they are exactly what they sound like. They're just big rain dumpers, capable of causing some serious localized flash flooding.
Okay, let's completely shift gears now. We've talked about floods, we've talked about storms. Let's talk about the complete opposite. While the east is dealing with all that moisture, a massive dome of scorching hot air is building over in Western Australia, and it's about to start a journey right across the southern half of the continent, bringing some of the most brutal heat we've seen all season. And you can see how this monster heat wave is going to move across the country. It really gets going in Western Australia early in the week, with temperatures just rocketing up towards a blistering 48 degrees Celsius. By Thursday, that mass of hot air spills into South Australia, hitting peaks of around 47. And then by Friday, it shoves its way into Victoria and New South Wales, bringing widespread temperatures well into the 40s before a cool change finally brings some relief over the weekend. And just so we're crystal clear, we are not talking about your average hot summer day. These are extreme, dangerous temperatures. Look at this, 48 degrees forecast for Panawanica in WA, pushing 48 through the Gullah Ranges in South Australia, up to 46 degrees in Mildura, Victoria. This is the kind of heat that puts incredible stress on people, on our infrastructure, and of course, on the landscape itself. Now, intense heat like this never happens in a vacuum. It always brings a dangerous friend along for the ride, especially in a dry landscape. And that friend is the threat of bushfire. As this heat builds and spreads across the southeast, it's mixing with other ingredients to create the perfect conditions for a potentially catastrophic fire event. You can really think of it as a recipe for disaster, and it's a simple one. Step 1, take extreme heat, temperatures climbing up over 45 degrees, and use it to bake the landscape until it's tinder dry. Step 2, make sure that landscape hasn't had much rain recently. And step 3, add the accelerant. In this case, strong, gusty winds of nearly 60 kilometers per hour, just waiting to whip any tiny spark into an uncontrollable inferno. And if that recipe wasn't alarming enough on its own, this quote, "This is what puts it all into a truly chilling perspective." Josh from Cyclone's OZ points out that this setup is starting to look a lot like what Australia saw back in late 2019 and early 2020. That period, as many of you will remember, was the Black Summer. It wasn't just a bad fire season. It was a national catastrophe. It burned over 24 million hectares, destroyed thousands of homes, and choked our biggest cities with smoke for weeks on end. That is not a comparison you make lightly. It tells you just how high the stakes are right now. So we end up here with a continent facing down two powerful, opposing, and incredibly dangerous forces of nature at the very same time. And it really leaves us with a critical question. As these extreme weather events, both flood and fire, not only get more intense but also happen more often at the same time, how do we as people start to adapt to what might just be our challenging new normal?